My name is Amelia Hartley, and I am 32 years old. I grew up in a two-room apartment above a laundromat in a town called Millbridge, where the walls were thin enough that I could hear my mother crying softly after my father left us when I was 9. We didn't have much. My winter coat came from a church donation bin, 2 sizes too big, and I wore it 3 years in a row because there was nothing else. My mother worked double shifts at a diner just to keep the lights on, and I promised myself, lying awake in that tiny bedroom I shared with my younger brother, that one day I would build a life where no one ever looked at me with pity again. I met my husband, Nathaniel Cole, at 24, during my first real job at a marketing firm in Boston. He came from money, old, comfortable, generational money, the kind that never had to think twice about a grocery bill. He was charming in those early days, attentive in a way that made me feel like the poverty of my childhood was simply a chapter one had closed, not a shadow that would follow me into every room I ever walked into again. We married 18 months later. His family never fully warmed to me, but Nathaniel always said it didn't matter, that he had chosen me and that was the only vote that counted. I believed him completely. I built our home with the same quiet determination my mother had once used to stretch a single paycheck across 30 days. I never once mentioned where I came from unless someone asked directly. Not out of shame, but because I had worked too hard to be defined by it. That changed on a Friday night in October, 8 years into our marriage, at a private dinner Nathaniel hosted for 3 of his closest college friends at our house in the suburbs of Chicago. The wine was expensive, the laughter was loud, and somewhere between the second bottle and the dessert course, one of his friends asked, almost carelessly, where exactly I had grown up. Nathaniel answered before I could open my mouth. He smiled, that same charming smile I had fallen in love with 9 years earlier, and told the entire table in vivid, mocking detail about the girl who once wore a coat 3 sizes too big because her mother couldn't afford a new one. The table laughed. I sat there frozen, holding a wine glass I could no longer feel in my hand, watching the only man I had ever fully trusted turn my mother's exhaustion, my childhood hunger, and every silent night I had once cried myself to sleep into a punchline for his friends' entertainment. And that was the exact moment I decided what I was going to do next. I didn't say a word at the table that night. I simply set down my glass, excused myself with a quiet smile, and walked upstairs as though nothing at all had happened. Nathaniel didn't even notice I was gone until his friends had left near midnight. And by then, I was already lying in bed with my back turned to the door, pretending to be asleep. He never apologized. Not that night, not the next morning. When I finally brought it up over coffee 2 days later, he laughed it off the same way he'd laughed it off at the table. "Amelia, it was just a story," he said, stirring sugar into his cup like the conversation bored him. "Everyone has a past. Mine just happens to be more interesting than a coat that didn't fit." Something in me went very quiet after that. Not angry quiet, calculating quiet. I started noticing things I had spent years choosing not to notice. The way Nathaniel introduced me at his firm's events as my wife, she used to work in marketing, as though my career had simply stopped existing the moment I married him. The way his mother, Margaret, referred to my side of the family as your people whenever the subject of holidays came up. The way Nathaniel had quietly taken over managing our joint investment accounts 3 years earlier, telling me it was easier this way since I traveled less for work than he did. I began paying closer attention to our finances, late at night after he'd gone to sleep, scrolling through statements on my laptop with the sound turned all the way down. What I found didn't shock me the way it once would have. There were transfers, small and recurring, moving out of our joint account into something labeled only as NC Holdings, Personal. Nearly $4,000 a month, every month, for over 2 years. I said nothing. I smiled at dinner. I laughed at his stories. I let him believe that a joke about a secondhand coat had rolled off me the way everything else always had. But I quietly opened an account of my own that Nathaniel didn't know existed. I contacted an old friend from college, Priya Okafor, now a family law attorney in Chicago, and asked her to meet me for coffee just to talk. I began saving copies of every financial statement I could access, screenshotting them one by one onto a private cloud folder Nathaniel would never think to look for. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning while Nathaniel was in a meeting downtown, I sat alone at our kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at a single search bar. I typed one word: flights. And for the first time in 9 years, I felt something that didn't feel like fear at all. I didn't book the flight that morning. Not yet. Something in me needed to understand exactly what I was leaving before I decided where I was going. So instead, I closed the laptop, drove to Priya's office that same afternoon, and told her everything: the coat, the dinner, the laughter, the transfers I'd found buried under a name that wasn't mine. Priya listened without interrupting, the way good lawyers do, taking notes on a legal pad while her coffee went cold beside her. When I finished, she leaned back and asked me a single question that changed the direction of everything. "Amelia, do you know what NC Holdings actually is?" I didn't. She did. It took her firm's research assistant less than a week to trace it. NC Holdings wasn't a hidden slush fund for golf trips or expensive watches, as I'd quietly assumed. It was a shell company registered under Nathaniel's name alone, funneling money into a second property 40 minutes outside the city. A lake house Nathaniel had purchased 18 months earlier, fully furnished, fully paid for, using money that had come directly out of our joint accounts, money I had helped earn through my own consulting work on the side. Work Nathaniel had once called cute but unnecessary. I sat in Priya's office, holding the printed property records with hands that had gone strangely steady. Somewhere underneath the shock, I felt something else entirely: a cold, clear relief. This wasn't only about a cruel joke at a dinner table anymore. This was about a man who had spent years quietly building an exit of his own, long before I had ever considered building mine. Priya asked the obvious question next: "Does anyone else know about the lake house?" That's when I remembered something I'd dismissed months earlier as nothing. A text I'd glimpsed once on Nathaniel's phone from a name I didn't recognize, saved simply as V, asking whether he was coming up this weekend, the same weekend he'd told me he was in Denver for work. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. I did now. Priya recommended a private investigator, a calm, unhurried woman named Delphine Okoye, who specialized in exactly this kind of quiet unraveling. Within 4 days, Delphine had photographs. Nathaniel at the lake house on a Saturday afternoon he told me was a business trip, laughing on a dock with a woman who was very clearly not a colleague. In a house paid for with money I had helped earn while wearing a coat 3 sizes too big as a child. I sat alone that night at our kitchen table again, the same laptop open in front of me, the same search bar waiting. This time, I didn't hesitate. I booked the flight. But before I left, I decided Nathaniel deserved to understand exactly what he was about to lose. All of it. At once, in a single evening he would never forget. I planned it the way I imagined my mother once planned how to stretch a single paycheck across an entire month, carefully, without wasting a single move. Priya helped me file the paperwork quietly, ensuring my consulting income, my private savings, and my legal claim to half of everything Nathaniel had tried to hide were fully documented before he had any idea I knew a single thing. Delphine's photographs, time-stamped and verified, sat in a folder alongside bank records tracing every transfer from our joint account into NC Holdings. I chose a Saturday evening for the conversation, the same night Nathaniel had once hosted his friends and turned my childhood into entertainment. This time, I hosted. I invited no one but him. He came home to candles lit, the good plates set, a bottle of wine already breathing on the counter. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Hope, maybe, that I had finally let the dinner comment go. "This is nice," he said, loosening his tie. "What's the occasion?" "Closure," I said simply, and slid a folder across the table. I watched the color drain slowly from his face as he opened it. The lake house records first, then Delphine's photographs, then the bank statements tracing every quiet withdrawal back to his own signature. He opened his mouth twice before any sound came out. "Amelia, I can explain the house." "You don't need to," I said. "I already know what it is. I know who V is too." He went very still. "It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, Nathaniel. You spent 2 years building an exit for yourself with money I helped earn, while I spent 9 years pretending a joke about my childhood didn't cost me anything." My voice didn't shake. I had practiced this moment in my head so many times over the past 3 weeks that saying it out loud felt almost calm, almost easy. You wanted everyone at that dinner table to laugh at where I came from. I want you to understand exactly what that girl in the secondhand coat is capable of now." He reached for my hand across the table. I pulled it back before he could touch it. "I've already spoken to my attorney," I said. "The lake house, the transfers, all of it, it's documented. You have two choices tomorrow morning. You can fight me in court and let a judge decide how much of your family's reputation survives the discovery process. Or you can sign what Priya sends you and let this end quietly." Nathaniel stared at the folder for a long moment, then at me, as though seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time in 9 years. "And if I don't sign anything?" he asked quietly. I stood, smoothed my dress, and picked up my phone. "Then Margaret can hear about the lake house from a courtroom instead of from me." Nathaniel signed everything within the week. Priya later told me she'd rarely seen a case move that fast. But between Delphine's photographs, the financial records, and the very real threat of his mother learning about the lake house from a judge instead of her son, he didn't have much appetite for a fight. He kept the lake house. I didn't want it. What I wanted was already documented in the settlement. Half of everything built during our marriage, full ownership of the consulting business. I'd grown quietly in the margins of his indifference, and my name permanently removed from NC Holdings, a company I hadn't even known I was legally tied to until 3 weeks earlier. Margaret called me exactly once. After the divorce was finalized, her voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "I hope you're satisfied," she said. I told her quite calmly that satisfaction wasn't the word I would choose. Relief was closer. I did book that flight eventually. Not to run from anything, but towards something. 6 months after the papers were signed, I flew to Millbridge and stood outside the laundromat my mother once worked above, now converted into a small bakery. I bought my mother, finally retired, a proper winter coat, one that fit her perfectly, and we laughed about the one I'd worn 3 sizes too big for 3 straight years. My consulting firm grew faster in the year after the divorce than it had in the previous 5 combined. Clients started commenting that my work felt sharper, bolder, less concerned with softening every edge to make a room comfortable. I told them the truth once, to a colleague who asked directly. I'd simply stopped spending half my energy protecting someone who had never once protected me. I ran into one of Nathaniel's old college friends at a conference, 18 months later, one of the men who had laughed at that dinner table. He looked uncomfortable the moment he recognized me, clearly expecting bitterness. Instead, I shook his hand, asked politely about his family, and watched him struggle to reconcile the composed woman in front of him with whatever story Nathaniel must have told afterward to explain why his wife had simply disappeared one Tuesday and never come back. I think about that dinner sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with a strange kind of gratitude. Nathaniel gave me, without meaning to, the one thing 9 years of comfortable silence never had, the reason to finally stop shrinking myself to fit a table that was never really mine. My mother asked me recently if I regretted any of it. I told her the truth. The only thing I regretted was staying quiet for as long as I did.